Hey there everyone, Paolo here, and welcome back. Today we're talking Dark Souls, more specifically, a approach guide for new players. This is going to be a guide for new players that want to try the Souls games, but have been intimidated by the marketing and everybody else talking about them and being told how hard they are, or maybe even tried them and just got the crap kicked out of them and got frustrated and gave up. I honestly do believe that most everyone can play and can beat these Souls games if you have reasonably good hand-eye coordination and you don't handicap yourself. By this I mean if you're on PC, you don't use keyboard and mouse when you can use controller or things like that. But if you have reasonably good hand-eye coordination, reasonably good environmental awareness, and reasonably good directional memory, what's the word I'm looking for? So you're not going to get lost. Reasonably good sense of direction. If you have those three things reasonably good, you can beat the Souls games. They can be beaten. But there is several elements that you really can't be taught through a tutorial that once you can wrap your mind around them and you kind of realize, all right, if I take this into account, it makes approaching the game so much easier. Now, I'm not going to talk about using your stamina this way and blocking here, using parries on this character. There's a whole bunch of better YouTubers out there that have done much better videos that talk about managing your stamina, your dodge rolls, and all of that. I'm going to focus much more on two major elements that are kind of psychological in nature as to your approach to the game. I do have a few other side items after that, but these two big elements are what I really want to focus on. Before we start, the footage you're seeing in the background is all going to be Dark Souls 1. I'm going to avoid any Dark Souls 3 spoilers. There won't be any real talk about that other than some maybe some basic control ideas going on. And there will be some Dark Souls 1 spoilers, though, in the form of a few bosses I'm going to show in order to sort of represent what I'm talking about within this video. Okay, so let's dive in. The first one, and the big one of the two that we're going to talk about today, and they kind of tie together, but it's the biggest one I see most people fail on when they first start out. And a lot of this has to do with the marketing of Bandai Namco. A lot of this has to do with the media surrounding the game. But they go into these games expecting to die, knowing they're going to die. When they die, they lose their souls, and then they become frustrated because they don't get them back. Where if you watch someone that has played through these games a lot and really learned them, you'll notice that, yes, those people might not die nearly as much as you, but when they do die, it's not a big deal. You can lose huge amount of souls, and you don't see them really flinch at all because the souls are easy come, easy go. And that's the real big key element to playing these games that I could really push, really emphasize for people. You're going to start off and you're going to be like level 20, 17 through 20, just past the tutorial part of the game. And you're going to be running around and you might be carrying 1,500, 2,000, 3,100 souls on you, and you're going to die. It's going to happen. No matter what you do, as you're learning to play these games for the first time and you're learning what you can handle in terms of how much stamina you have, which weapon you're using and all this, you're going to die and you're going to lose those souls. And then on your way back, because you're now under a little bit of extra pressure to get back to where you died and recover your souls, well, you're under extra pressure, you're going to make a mistake, and you're going to die again, and you're going to lose all of those things. And here's where a lot of new players, they just become frustrated. Like, I just lost so much progress. There was so much. I could have gotten like 4 whole levels with those souls and maybe upgraded a weapon with those souls. And they get frustrated and quit. Here's the thing. What you lost, what you died, what you gave up by dying there was so inconsequential, it's not even funny. Early on, everything within the game, everything within the Souls games related to your soul level, how many souls you get, escalates exponentially as you play through the game. Those, let's say, 3,000 souls that you lost, late game, one fairly large, robust enemy will drop that amount of souls. Just one. You will be regularly running around with over 100,000 souls. At level 17, 18, 19, soul level 17, 18, 19, it might only cost 300, not 300, but probably like 500 to 700 souls to level up. At soul level 100, it costs over 100,000 souls to level up. The amount that you lost was just completely not worth less, but inconsequential in terms of the grand value of how many souls you're going to acquire within the game. through a single playthrough, you're probably going to acquire well over 1 million souls going through. Losing 4,000 is nothing. I think I said 3,000 the first time. Anyway, it's so small. Now, once you can get beyond this mental hurdle and say, you know what? It's not a big deal. I lost those souls. I'll be able to make them back somewhere else. Well, then you can play looser. And when you start playing looser, the game actually becomes easier. And this sounds counterintuitive because everyone's like, oh, you got to manage your stamina and all that. And you absolutely do. Managing your stamina, timing your rolls and all of that correctly is very important for these games. But when you're all stressed and you're locked up and you're panicking at what's coming to you, as soon as you start panicking because you see an enemy swinging that you didn't see or an ambush coming, that's when you start spamming your buttons. And then the game punishes you even more. Abilities tend to queue within these games. So if you hit R1, R1, no matter what, well, that's not true. This is part where Dark Souls 3 has started to change. Dark Souls 3, if you hit R1, R1, even if you just ended up clicking it twice before it finished, it's going to do 2 significant attacks. It's much more important to be relaxed. Hit R1. After you see how that's going, decide, all right, do I want to follow that up with an additional attack, or do I want to disengage and roll away, or maybe use an R2, then do that button press. But if you're panicking because you're worried that you're got to get back to those souls, you're going to lose all these items, and you start mashing on the buttons, well, then you're just going to run out of stamina, you're going to get stun locked, and you're going to die, and you're going to lose it even more. Hopefully this makes sense. I think that's about the best way I can explain it. The souls, they're throwaway currency. They really are. You can get them so easily. What you can best do when you die, evaluate why you died. Look at it and say, okay, what happened there that caused me to kill, that I died? Was it an ambush? Where did the enemy come from behind me? And the next time you get back to that area, scout, look around. As I talked about in my previous video where I said, like, one of the great things about the Souls games is they use sightlines, where if you use the sightlines to your advantage, you can almost always see the ambushes coming. You can see where the enemies are sitting, and you can plan for it. So if you die to an ambush, on your way back, be observant, look around, find those sightlines, see what ambushed you, and find a better way of approaching it. If you learn how to, if that death caused you to learn that there's a trap or an ambush there, that is worth far more to you and playing through these games than the souls you dropped were worth to that character. Okay? Hopefully that makes sense. If it doesn't, let me know in the comments down below. I'll try to explain a little bit better. Now, we got more to go over, though. The second thing I want to talk about, and this one is more directly into the psychology of the visual appearance of many enemies. The games do a great job of making these very visually terrifying enemies. And I'm going to cut the footage here of the Gaping Dragon. The Gaping Dragon's kind of, depending on how you play the game, he's like about the 4th boss. Let's see here. You got the Asylum Demon, the Taurus, the Gargoyles, 5th boss. 5th or 6th boss, depending on how you play through it. He's still relatively early. But when this thing first shows up, if you don't know he's coming, if you've not watched a walkthrough or anything like that, and he shows up, he is terrifying. I can remember to this day the first time I entered his zone, because the way the zone's set up, you're coming down and along this long wall, you can clearly see this massive arena out in front of you, and it's like, oh man, there's something there. And then you hit the fog wall at the bottom, and it's like, a fog wall, massive arena, must be a boss fight. And at first there's this little snout sticking up, and then you realize it's just the snout of this massive, massive dragon, and it's panic inducing. Well, the psychology here is Dark Souls or From Software with these games, the bigger and badder an enemy looks, generally, the easier they actually are. One of the things that people love about these games is they tend to be fairly balanced. I have to keep using the word tend to because Dark Souls 2 kind of screwed a lot of this up, but they tend to be fairly balanced. They have ways built in that you can beat these things without being a master MLG pro gamer. So there's balancing issues in there. Now, a massive dragon, in order to counter the pure raw damage they can put out, well, they have very slow, predictable attacks, slow movement, allowing the player to use their strengths to their advantage and attack this thing. So the psychology here is when you see an enemy, don't go right into your mind and say, oh, this thing is massive, it's got to be very, very dangerous. Most cases that is going to turn out to be false, and the Gaping Dragon is the perfect example of this. He first comes up out of the water, he is just terrifyingly evil looking and gigantic, and he turns out to be one of the easiest bosses ever created within the game. And this is not the only example of this, I'm just using this as the prime example because he's relatively close to the front of the game. And once you've gotten beyond that psychological horror of it, and you just kind of go ahead, you know what, yeah, let's go at it, you realize he's so easy, and this happens time and time again throughout these games. It does serve to note, though, then also we have to talk about sometimes the least intimidating looking ones tend to be the most dangerous looking, the most dangerous ones to actually fight. This is not always the case also, but the least intimidating ones tend to have very quick attacks, and while each individual attack doesn't do a whole lot of damage, they can stun lock you very quickly and really punish you. Once they break your shield block, and they can just really punish you entirely and do huge amounts of damage very, very quickly. Now, in terms of bosses and talking about the games, there are definitely a few bosses within each version, each series of the game that people are going to talk about that are just very, very tough. In Dark Souls 1, these are kind of like your gear check bosses or your player skill check bosses. In Dark Souls 1, it was Ornstein and Smaug, or Smog, whatever you want to call them. Ornstein and Smaug, I think is how it's supposed to be pronounced. Dark Souls 2, it was kind of the Smelter Demon. Dark Souls 3, it's probably going to be considered the Dancer. Bloodborne, what ones was it in Bloodborne? Kind of early on, it was the Hunter dude. Very early on, like the second boss, he was kind of a skilled check. I don't know Bloodborne well enough to really say there. But there are definitely a few bosses that they're going to kick your ass. They're going to kick your ass over and over and over and again. But, most bosses, if you go in and you are not panicking because you're worried about losing your souls, and you go in and you're observant of what you're fighting, you're quickly going to find that there are safe zones in where you can fight these enemies, and they become much, much easier to fight. For example, just rather than circling left, try circling right sometimes. Quite literally, there are certain bosses that if you circle clockwise rather than counterclockwise or vice versa, all of a sudden 2/3 of the abilities just completely miss. And it's that simple of a thing in some cases. Now, I'm not giving them all away. That is a specific example for a certain boss I'm thinking of, but I'm not going to ruin which boss that is. We'll let you figure that going on. So those are the two largest points I really want to point out. If you can get over those two, if you can get to the point where you can accept the death and the loss of souls without much angst or anxiety caused from that, and you can get to the point where you don't freak out every time you see a new enemy, your play experience with the Souls games is going to improve vastly. You're going to find yourself making some great strides moving forward within the game. Things are going to start dying, you're going to start progressing, and they're going to become just much more enjoyable experiences. Now, I do have a few other small items that I think will help, so let's go over those. The number 3 thing I want to talk about here today is use your first character, maybe even 2, maybe even 3 characters as just throwaway characters. Don't expect to finish the game with your first character. Pick a character, get out there into the game, and just experience the mechanics. Try it. Go through, take your time, explore the areas and everything, get beat on, die, go back, beat on things, and after you've put in 4 or 6 hours, go create a new character. And what you're going to find is you're going to be able to go back through that same area that took you 4 or 6 hours to do the first character with. You're going to clear it in a quarter of that time, well, maybe a third of that time. And your character, you're going to grow. And this is the main thing that you do as playing these games, at least on a PvE side, is you just learn. You learn the world. So the first character is kind of a test dummy that you're going to run through with. And there's going to be a point somewhere about halfway through the game where finally you overcome the hump and you're now got the weapons you're looking for, you now got the gear you're looking for and everything. But that's very hard to do on your first playthrough. So yeah, like I said, treat your first character as just a test demo of the game, a dummy. You're going to send that character out there, you're going to mess around, you're going to try some things, you're going to die, you're going to look for a ledge, you're going to try to jump on the ledge, and you're going to realize, oh, that's not a ledge I can jump onto. It's not a big deal. You're going to go ahead and you're going to create a new character after that. The second one, or I guess the fourth item now I want to talk about, is use a balanced build. We're starting to get into some things that are a little more specific. And if you watch YouTube of the Souls games, you're going to come across these guys that are MLG pro at these things, you know, the speedrunners and stuff, and they're all going to be using these very, very powerful weapons, generally large two-handed strength weapons. The Black Knight Halberd, the Black Knight Ultra Great Sword, things along this line, or even high-end sorceries. And it's common for new players to go ahead and try to emulate this. They go ahead and they try to, you know, they find these same weapons, like, oh, I saw this other dude using it and he was just wrecking face with it, and they try to do it themselves. And they get punished for it, and punished for it hard. The higher the damage of a weapon, be it dex or strength, generally the higher the skill ceiling is required to use it. The Black Knight Halberd, or Glaive, depending on which version of the game you're talking about, is notorious for this. Are they the same one? The Glaive and the Halberd? Black Knight Glaive? I might have just pissed some people off with that one. Anyway, I know what I'm thinking of. It's a large two-handed halberd, but it's the Black Knight's weapon. Is notorious for just doing immense amounts of damage. But you need to be a very skilled player to use it effectively. Essentially, when you swing this weapon, if you hit with the handle rather than the tip of the weapon, you do noticeably less damage. It also has very long wind-ups for its swings and very long cool recovery periods after you swing. So if you swing and miss, you're wide open for a counter attack because it's taking a long time to recover. Dex weapons, the high-end ones, can also have their own problems going the other direction. Dex weapons can be very good for fast attacks, but even the best ones out there don't tend to do the big alpha damage that the strength weapons do. So against some of the larger health enemies, you're going to have to spend a long time attacking them. A good player that has experienced the games, they have the dodges and the rolls down and the attacks down. They know how to fight these enemies, that they can make the most use of those high dex weapons. For a new player, a brand new player, use what is generally called a quality build or balance build. What this means is find a weapon, generally it's going to be like a long sword, even a bastard sword, possibly even a claymore, that has, well, claymore's kind of moving more strength, but generally like a long sword or a bastard sword, possibly a mace, possibly an axe, that has roughly equal strength and dexterity requirements, and roughly equal strength and dexterity, not synergies, but scaling. Strength and dexterity scaling. So this way you can build a character that's going to have relatively fast attack, but also reasonably high damage. And it's a great way to go about learning the game. Because what you're going to find is every build has certain things that counter it fairly well. Those people running around with the big Black Knight's halberd, the two-handed halberd, can be countered quite effectively with large groups of weak enemies. They're going to get in and they're going to basically stun lock the guy before they can swing. As they're winding up their swing, the enemies are going to start wailing on them, knock them down, and they're going to die very, very fast. The smaller dex builds that have a whole lot of really quick flourishing attacks, they can cut through massive swaths of weak enemies, but then they run into an enemy with large heavy armor, and then their weapon does much less damage. They're going to run into trouble. As a quality build, a build with roughly equal strength and dex, what you're able to do is, when you come across a group of small weak enemies, you can pull out a scythe, and you're going to be able to equip it, and you're going to be able to use it, and you can cleave through them very fast, very effectively, without much trouble. When you come up across a very large, heavily armored enemy, you can put the scythe away, you can pull out a mace, and the mace does extra damage to those heavily armored targets. You can break through the armor quickly and burn through them that way. Where if you go very specialized and you only have one certain type of build, you're going to get punished later on. After you've gone and you've learned the games, then go back and try the other builds. Hopefully this makes sense. You're going to want to do a quality build, roughly equal strength and dexterity. Sorceries, miracles, they're also pretty good. They're a little tough to learn early on, as there's some enemies they're extremely effective against, basically anything without a shield, but anything with a shield, that's just going to absorb them, and you're going to have some trouble doing them, at least solo. I would not recommend sorceries for new players right out the gate either, though pyromancy can work into that, but now we're getting a little too specific into what I was talking about. The last bit that I want to talk about here today, it's two small elements. The first one is don't be afraid to use the guides. I guess we're actually in items 5 now, whatever. There's a whole lot of content out there. There's walkthroughs, guides, tutorials, all this stuff. Don't be afraid to use them, but I will recommend use them correctly. One of the things that I really put in my previous video where I talked about why people like the Souls games is that sense of exploring and learning and the reveals of when you figure something out for yourself. If you just watch somebody do a walkthrough and you follow and play behind their walkthrough, I think you're going to lose a whole lot of that. So my recommendation would be go ahead, pick one of the games, try the game out, and get in. And when you run into a wall where you're just not able to beat a boss, you're just not able to, get where you need to go or something, then start watching one of the walkthroughs, one of the strategy guides or something, and follow it up to where you are stuck or where you got lost. And what you might find is they took a different path than you. And it could be that you're in a zone that you're not supposed to be. Once you discover, oh, I should be over here doing this, stop the video, go and play through, continue on until you get stuck again. Use it as a compendium that you check to when you get stuck before you get frustrated, not as a rule set of how to play through the game. If you do this, I think you'll find that both the game won't become quite as frustrating, but you'll still get most of that reward and sense of accomplishment of making it through on yourself, making it through by yourself. Use it just as like a guide to point you in the correct direction. I would also recommend, hopefully you find the right user guide for that. Some of them are going to be tough. Don't go for the top end players because they're going to run through the game in a completely different manner than the low end players will. Similar to them using higher end weapons because they're higher skilled player weapons. If you follow like the best players that are speedrunning the game and you try to play through it in that manner, you're going to run into trouble because they're going to be fighting bosses at soul level 30 that you shouldn't be fighting until they're soul level 60 or 70. So you're going to be way under equipped, way under geared doing that. So find someone that's more of a basic, all-encompassing walkthrough, follow that, and then after you've gotten proficient with the games, use the other stuff. And the last thing I would say that will pull all this together, don't be afraid to cheese. And this is going to sound silly, but there's reasons that this game allows cheesing and it doesn't patch it out. There's so many places where using a bow and arrow or using the elevation to your advantage, you can cheese the AI and make the game easier for yourself. In time, you want to learn not to do this. Just that's my opinion at least. You want to try and learn not to do this. But if you run into a certain enemy and he's just kicking the crap out of you, don't be afraid to cheese them. The games are difficult. They are difficult. Let's not sugarcoat it. They are difficult. Making it a little bit easier for yourself so you can progress is not a bad thing. It's only on you. You're not cheating if you're using cheese. If you're going to download hacks, well, that's a whole different story. But don't be afraid to use the environment to your advantage and do this. No one's going to come down. Okay, some people, if they see you doing it, they're going to call blah, blah, blah. Who cares what they think? In time, hopefully your skills will improve. You'll have a better way to go about it. You can go ahead and you can play through without using the cheese, but it's a perfectly allowable fundamental way you can play the game initially to get through them and learn the world as you go. All right, so hopefully that it gives everyone a pretty good idea of how to play the game. The first two are the biggest two. Don't worry about losing your souls when you die, and don't let the look or the intro of an enemy scare you to the point where you're afraid to actually learn and experience with it. Once you can overcome those two, then the games become much easier to play. The other things are little pointers, tips, and tricks here or there. Let me know what you think, if all this makes sense. Until next time, though, this has been Paler. Thanks for watching.